Growing up, my sister Madison and I shared everything. Our childhood bedroom was filled with whispered secrets, shared dreams, and the kind of bond I thought would last forever. We would stay up late talking about our future planning adventures and promising to always have each other's backs. But when Madison got married to Trevor last year, something shifted. The warmth in her eyes when she looked at me slowly faded, replaced by something I could not quite understand. Then came that devastating moment when she looked me straight in the eye and said those words that would shatter everything I believed about family. Before I dive into what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. Trust me, what my sister did next will completely shock you, so let us get into it. I remember the day Madison and Trevor announced they were moving back home. I was 27 working as a freelance graphic designer from my childhood bedroom that I had transformed into a cozy workspace. The walls were covered with my design projects, inspirational quotes, and photos of Madison and me from happier times. I had been contributing to the household expenses for years, paying my fair share of utilities and groceries, while saving up for my own place. When Madison walked through the front door with Trevor in their matching luggage sets, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. My big sister was home. She looked polished and professional in her navy blazer and perfectly styled blonde hair, while Trevor stood behind her in his expensive suit, checking his phone with an air of importance that seemed to fill the room. "We need to stay here for a few weeks," Madison announced to our parents over dinner that first night, "just until we can save enough for a proper down payment on our dream house." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It will be just like old times, right, Celeste?" I nodded eagerly, already imagining late-night conversations and sisterly bonding sessions. But as the days passed, I began to notice subtle changes in Madison's behavior. She would make offhand comments about my work, questioning whether graphic design was a real career or just a hobby I was using to avoid growing up. When clients called during dinner, she would roll her eyes and mutter about unprofessional boundaries. Trevor was equally dismissive, though his approach was more calculated. He would ask pointed questions about my income, comparing it to Madison's salary at the marketing firm where she worked. "You know Celeste," he would say, while sipping his morning coffee. "Madison makes more in a month than you probably do in 3. Maybe it is time to consider something more stable." The first real conflict arose over bathroom time. I had always showered in the morning before starting work, but Madison suddenly decided she needed the bathroom from 7 to 8:30 for her elaborate beauty routine. When I mentioned that this interfered with my schedule, she laughed dismissively. "Celeste, you work from home. You can shower any time. I have to look professional for actual meetings with real clients." The word "actual" hit me like a slap. Then came the invasion of my personal space. I would return from grocery shopping to find Madison using my laptop charger, wearing my favorite sweater, or rearranging my desk to make room for her own belongings. When I gently asked her to check with me first, she accused me of being territorial and selfish. "We are family," she would say, with that patronizing smile. "Family shares. Or did you forget that while you have been living in your little bubble, our parents tried to mediate, but their approach was always the same. Madison is married now, Celeste. She has different responsibilities. Can you not just be a little more flexible?" The message was clear. Madison's needs came first, and mine were secondary, inconvenient afterthoughts. The breaking point came when I discovered Madison had been going through my personal files on my computer while I was out running errands. She claimed she was just looking for inspiration for her own work projects, but I found my private journal entries open on the screen, along with confidential client communications. "How dare you!" I confronted her that evening, my hands shaking with anger. "In violation." Madison just shrugged. I was bored. "Besides, it is not like you have anything interesting to hide. Your life is pretty much an open book of mediocrity." That night, I lay awake on my bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering when my loving sister had transformed into this cold, calculating person who seemed to take pleasure in making me feel small. The real battle began 3 weeks into their stay when Madison made her next move. I was in my room working on a crucial project deadline when she knocked on my door with Trevor standing behind her, arms crossed like a bodyguard. "Celeste, we need to talk," Madison announced, walking into my room without waiting for permission. "I have been thinking about the space situation, and I really need a proper office for my remote work days. This room has the best lighting and the most space. It would make sense for you to move your things to the living room." I stared at her in disbelief. "Move to the living room? Madison, this is my bedroom. I have lived here for 27 years. It is just temporary," she said with that fake smile that never reached her eyes. "Do not be so selfish. I need privacy for important video calls with corporate clients. You can work anywhere." Trevor stepped forward, his voice carrying that condescending tone I had grown to hate. "Celeste does not really contribute much to the household anyway. She should be more flexible about these arrangements." I looked toward our parents, who were hovering in the hallway, hoping for support. But Dad just cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Mom gave me that pleading look that said, "Just go along with it." "Madison has established herself professionally," Mom said softly. "She needs space to maintain her career momentum. You understand Don, not you, honey." That weekend, Madison began the systematic takeover of my space. She moved my clothes to a makeshift area in the laundry room and relocated my desk to a corner of the living room where there was no privacy and constant foot traffic. When I protested, she accused me of being immature and unwilling to adapt to change. "This is what adults do, Celeste. They make sacrifices for family." But somehow, I was the only one making sacrifices. Trevor took control of the internet situation, installing a new router and changing all the passwords. When I asked for the new network information, he claimed it was for security purposes and that I could ask him each time I needed access. The humiliation of having to beg for Wi-Fi in my own home was almost unbearable. Madison scheduled important video conferences during times when she knew I had client calls, then demanded absolute silence throughout the house. If I made even the slightest noise, she would emerge from my former room with an exaggerated sigh and lecture me about respect and consideration. "Some of us have real jobs with real responsibilities," she would say loud enough for our parents to hear. "Not everyone has the luxury of playing on their computer all day." The situation escalated when I discovered Madison had been reading my private journal. Not only had she invaded my digital privacy, but she had also gone through my physical belongings, finding the leather-bound book where I wrote my most personal thoughts and fears. When I confronted her, she laughed it off. "Your writing is so dramatic, Celeste. You make everything sound like the end of the world. Maybe if you spent less time wallowing in self-pity and more time building an actual career, you would not have so much to complain about." But the worst part was how she began interfering with my relationships. When my boyfriend Jake came over, Madison would insert herself into our conversations, making subtle comments about my financial instability and lack of direction. She would share embarrassing childhood stories and paint me as someone who had never quite grown up. "Jake seems like such a driven person," she would say with fake sweetness. "I hope Celeste's lack of ambition does not hold him back." Trevor would nod along, adding his own observations about successful couples and the importance of both partners contributing equally to the relationship. Their tag team approach was devastating to my self-confidence and began creating tension between Jake and me that had never existed before. The final straw came when Madison announced she would be claiming my room permanently as her home office. "Trevor and I have decided to extend our stay," she declared over dinner one evening. "The housing market is terrible right now, and it makes more sense to save money by living here longer." Our parents exchanged glances, but said nothing. The message was clear. Madison and Trevor were staying, and I was expected to accommodate their needs indefinitely. That night, I sat in the living room on the uncomfortable pull-out couch that had become my bed, surrounded by my belongings that were now scattered throughout the house like afterthoughts. I felt invisible in my own home, erased by someone who was supposed to love and protect me. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday morning in November. I had spent another sleepless night on the living room couch, listening to Trevor's loud snoring through the thin walls and Madison's alarm going off repeatedly at 5:30 in the morning for her elaborate workout routine in my former bedroom. I was making coffee in the kitchen when Madison swept in, wearing my favorite cashmere sweater, the one our grandmother had given me for my birthday. She poured herself a cup from the pot I had just brewed and sat down at the kitchen table with her laptop spreading her work papers across the entire surface. "Madison, that is my sweater," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice level. She looked down at the sweater as if noticing it for the first time. "Oh, this old thing, I found it in the laundry room. I figured you were not using it anymore, since you hardly leave the house these days." "I was not using it because you moved all my clothes to the laundry room," I replied, feeling my patience finally reaching its breaking point. Trevor entered the kitchen, then adjusting his tie and grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. He looked at me with that familiar expression of barely concealed disdain. "Good morning, Celeste," he said in a tone that suggested my presence was an inconvenience. "I hope you can keep the noise down today. Madison has 3 important client presentations, and she needs complete silence." That was the moment everything changed. I had been biting my tongue for months, absorbing their criticism, accepting their dismissive treatment, and allowing them to slowly erase my presence from my own life. But something inside me finally snapped. "No," I said, the word coming out stronger than I had intended. "I will not keep quiet. This is still my house, too." Madison looked up from her laptop with surprise. Then her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "Excuse me? You heard me. I am done being treated like an unwanted guest in my own home. I am done having my belongings moved around without permission. I am done with your constant criticism and your husband's condescending attitude." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of rain hitting the windows. Madison slowly closed her laptop and stood up, her eyes never leaving mine. "You know what your problem is, Celeste?" Her voice was eerily calm. "You have never learned to grow up. You are 27 years old, and you are still living with mommy and daddy, playing dress up as an artist and expecting everyone else to accommodate your Peter Pan syndrome." Trevor moved closer to Madison, presenting a united front against me. "She has a point, Celeste. Most people your age have established themselves independently. Maybe this situation is not working because you are not ready for adult responsibilities." I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. "I pay rent here. I contribute to household expenses. I have built a successful freelance business from scratch. How is that not taking responsibility?" Madison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Successful, Celeste, you make barely enough to cover your coffee habit. You live in a fantasy world where coloring pictures on a computer counts as a real job." The words hit me like physical blows. Everything I had worked for, every client I had satisfied Every project I had completed with pride and skill was being reduced to coloring pictures. At least I built my career honestly, I shot back. I did not have to marry someone to gain financial stability. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had crossed a line. Madison's face went white, then flushed red with rage. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you diminish everything I have accomplished? I have worked twice as hard as you ever have, and I have something to show for it. A career, a husband, a real life. Built on what foundation?" I asked, feeling reckless and desperate. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you married the first man who could provide the lifestyle you wanted." Trevor stepped forward, then his face dark with anger. "That is enough. You have no right to speak to my wife that way. And you have no right to come into my family's home and treat me like garbage," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. Madison moved closer to me, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. When she spoke, her voice was low and venomous, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "You want to know the truth, Celeste. You are just a burden to this family, a 27-year-old failure who clings to childhood fantasies because she is too scared to face reality. Nobody wants you here. We are all just too polite to say it." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt something inside me shatter, not just from the cruelty of what she had said, but from the realization that this person standing before me was not the sister I had loved and admired my entire life. Trevor nodded in agreement, his voice quiet but cutting. "Maybe it is time you found your own place. You are almost 30, Celeste. This dependency is not healthy for anyone." I stood there in my own kitchen, wearing pajamas and holding a coffee cup, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. The two people who had systematically dismantled my confidence and invaded my space were now telling me I was unwanted in my own home. But as I looked at their faces, expecting to see triumph or satisfaction, I saw something else entirely. Something that made me pause and really observe them for the first time in months. Madison's hands were shaking slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. There were dark circles under her eyes that her expensive concealer could not quite hide. Trevor kept checking his phone anxiously, and I noticed the way his jaw was clenched with tension. That afternoon, while Madison was out running errands and Trevor was at what he claimed was a work meeting, I decided to investigate the nagging feeling that something was not right. I had always been observant, a trait that served me well in my design work, and there were details about Madison and Trevor's behavior that were not adding up. I started by doing something I never thought I would do. I listened at doors. When Madison returned home, she immediately went to my former bedroom and closed the door. Within minutes, I heard her voice rise in what sounded like an argument. I crept closer to the door and heard fragments of a heated phone conversation. "I told you we need more time," Madison was saying, her voice strained and desperate. "The payments are already 3 months behind. If we can just stay here a little longer." My heart started racing. Payments. What payments? "No, he does not suspect anything yet," Madison continued. "But if we get evicted from here too, we will have nowhere left to go." Evicted from here, my mind raced with questions. Our family owned this house outright. There was no mortgage, no rent payments to anyone. What was Madison talking about? That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I installed a voice recording app on my phone and left it running during dinner, hoping to catch more clues about what Madison and Trevor were really planning. What I discovered the next morning, when I reviewed the recording, made my blood run cold. After I had gone to bed, Madison and Trevor had stayed in the kitchen, discussing their real intentions in voices they thought no one could hear. "How much longer do you think we can keep this up?" Trevor asked. "As long as it takes," Madison replied. "Once we get the house transferred into our names, we can sell it and use the money to cover our debts. The bankruptcy lawyer said this is our best option. And Celeste, what about her? She will have to figure out her own life. We all have our problems." I sat in the living room the next morning, listening to the recording over and over again, trying to process what I had learned. My sister and her husband were not just invading my space temporarily. They were planning to steal my family home and leave me with nothing. But the recording had also revealed something else. Something that gave me the first real weapon I had in this fight. Madison and Trevor were not the successful, financially stable couple they pretended to be. They were drowning in debt, facing bankruptcy, and desperately scrambling to save themselves at my family's expense. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. If I could prove what they were really doing, if I could expose their deception and their true financial situation, I might be able to save not just my room, but my entire family from their manipulation. It was time to fight back. The next few weeks were the hardest and most eye-opening of my life. Armed with the knowledge of Madison and Trevor's true situation, I began my own careful investigation while pretending to accept my diminished role in the household. Every morning, I would wake up on the uncomfortable couch, make coffee, and watch Madison perform her elaborate charade of success. She would dress in expensive clothes, carry her designer handbag, and leave for what she claimed were important business meetings. But now I knew the truth. She was spending her days desperately trying to negotiate with creditors and avoid the complete collapse of their financial house of cards. I started documenting everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every instance of them using our family home as collateral for their failing schemes. I discovered that Trevor had been listing our address as his primary residence on loan applications, using our family's good credit history to secure money they had no intention of repaying. The breakthrough came when I followed Madison one afternoon. Instead of going to her supposed client meeting, she drove to a bankruptcy attorney's office downtown. I waited in my car across the street and watched as she emerged 2 hours later, her face streaked with tears and her composure completely shattered. That night, I heard them arguing in hushed, desperate voices. "The lawyer says we have maybe 2 weeks before the creditors start seizing assets," Trevor whispered. "If your parents do not agree to put the house in our names, we are finished." "They will agree," Madison replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "I just need to convince them that Celeste is unstable. If they think she cannot be trusted with family assets, they will transfer everything to us for safekeeping." My heart stopped. They were planning to manipulate our elderly parents into signing over the house by convincing them I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. But I had one advantage they did not know about. Our parents were not as naive as Madison believed. Dad had been a successful accountant for 40 years before retirement, and Mom had managed the household finances with precision and intelligence. They were trusting people, but they were not fools. The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I asked my parents to sit down with me in Dad's study, away from Madison and Trevor's prying ears. "I need to tell you something." I began, my hands shaking, as I pulled out my phone with the recorded conversations. "And I need you to listen to everything before you say anything." For the next hour, I played them recording after recording. Madison's desperate phone calls to creditors, Trevor's discussions about using fraudulent documents, their cold, calculated plan to steal our family home and leave us all homeless while they escape their debts. Dad's face grew paler with each revelation. Mom sat in stunned silence, occasionally covering her mouth in shock. When the final recording ended, the room was so quiet, I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "How long have you known?" Dad finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I started suspecting something 2 weeks ago," I admitted, "but I wanted to be absolutely sure before I told you. I know how much you love Madison, and I did not want to destroy your relationship with her unless I had proof." Mom reached over and took my hand. "Oh, Celeste, I am so sorry. We thought we were helping Madison establish her independence. We had no idea she was—" She could not finish the sentence. Dad stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a folder I had never seen before. "I need to show you something," he said. "Madison and Trevor asked me to sign some documents last week. They said it was just paperwork to help them qualify for a mortgage. But now—" He handed me the papers, and my blood ran cold. They were property transfer documents that would have given Madison and Trevor complete ownership of our family home. If Dad had signed them, we would have lost everything. I told them I needed time to review the paperwork with my attorney, Dad said. Something about their urgency made me uncomfortable. Thank God I trusted that instinct. That afternoon, we confronted Madison and Trevor together as a family. I had set my phone to record the conversation, knowing we would need evidence of their reactions for the legal proceedings that would inevitably follow. Madison walked into the living room, expecting to find me cowering on the couch as usual. Instead, she found all three of us sitting together, united and prepared. "We need to talk," Dad said, his voice carrying an authority I had not heard since I was a child. "Of course," Madison replied, with her practiced smile. "What is this about?" "It is about the lies," I said simply. "All of them." I played the recordings. Every desperate phone call, every scheming conversation, every cruel plan they had made at our expense. Madison's face went white, then red, then white again, as the evidence of her deception filled the room. Trevor tried to bluster and deny, but the recordings were clear and damning. There was no way to explain away their own voices planning our destruction. "How could you?" Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Celeste is your sister. This is your family home. How could you plan to steal from us?" Madison's composure finally cracked completely. "You do not understand," she sobbed. "We lost everything. The house, the cars, everything. Trevor's business failed, and we have been living on credit cards for months. We are drowning. So you decided to drag us down with you?" Dad asked, his disappointment evident in every word. "We thought if we could just get a fresh start," Trevor began, but Dad cut him off. "By committing fraud, by manipulating elderly people into signing over their home, by emotionally abusing your sister until she believed she was worthless." The truth was finally out in the open, and the relief I felt was overwhelming. But as I looked at Madison, collapsed in tears, and finally stripped of all her pretenses, I felt something unexpected. I felt sorry for her. Not sorry enough to forgive what she had done, but sorry for the desperation that had driven her to betray everyone who loved her. Sorry for the fear that had transformed my confident, successful sister into someone I barely recognized. "You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live," Dad said firmly. "After that, we will be filing for restraining orders to keep you away from this property and our family." Madison looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Celeste, please. You do not understand the pressure we have been under. I never meant for things to go this far." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the sister who used to braid my hair and tell me bedtime stories. Then I thought about the woman who had called me a burden and tried to steal my future. "I understand more than you think," I said softly. "But understanding does not mean I have to accept being treated like I am worthless. What you did was wrong, Madison. What you both did was unforgivable." They left 3 days later, loading their belongings into a rental truck, while neighbors watched from their windows. Madison tried to apologize again, but her words felt hollow and self-serving. She was not sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had been caught. As their truck pulled away from the house where we had grown up together, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The sister I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I did not recognize. But for the first time in months, I could breathe freely in my own home. The real work of healing was just beginning. I spent the next several weeks in therapy, trying to understand how I had allowed myself to be diminished and manipulated so completely. I learned about gaslighting, emotional abuse, and the complicated dynamics of family relationships that can turn toxic without anyone realizing what is happening. Jake and I had long conversations about what we had both witnessed and how it had affected our relationship. He admitted that Madison and Trevor's constant criticism had made him question things about me that he had never doubted before. We worked together to rebuild the trust that their manipulation had eroded. My design business flourished once I had my space and confidence back. Without the constant criticism and interruption, I was able to focus on my work and take on bigger, more challenging projects. I realized that much of my self-doubt had been artificially imposed by people who needed me to feel small so they could feel powerful. 6 months later, Madison called me. Her voice was different, smaller, more humble, stripped of the arrogance that had characterized her behavior during those terrible months. "Celeste," she said, "I know I have no right to ask this, but could we talk? I have been in therapy, and I am starting to understand what I did to you, what I did to our whole family." I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown, where we could talk without the emotional weight of family history surrounding us. When I saw her, I barely recognized the broken woman sitting across from me. Gone were the expensive clothes and perfect makeup. She looked tired, older, and genuinely remorseful. "I do not expect you to forgive me," she began. "I just need you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. The therapy has helped me see that I was projecting my own failures onto you. I was so ashamed of what my life had become that I needed to make you feel like you were the one who was failing." She told me about the divorce, about starting over, with nothing about finally taking responsibility for the choices that had led to their financial ruin. Trevor had left her for another woman shortly after their scheme fell apart, abandoning her to face the consequences of their actions alone. "I lost everything," she said quietly. "My marriage, my family, my home, my self-respect. And the worst part is I deserved to lose it all." We talked for 3 hours that day, not as the women who had hurt each other so deeply, but as two people trying to understand how love had turned into such devastating betrayal. Madison did not ask for forgiveness, which was wise because I was not ready to give it. But she did something more important. She acknowledged the full scope of the damage she had caused and took complete responsibility for her actions. "You were never a burden, Celeste," she said, as we prepared to leave. "You were always the strong one. I just could not see it because I was drowning in my own weakness." Over the next year, we rebuilt our relationship slowly and carefully. Madison worked to understand and change the patterns of behavior that had led to her betrayal. I learned to set healthy boundaries and trust my own perceptions instead of allowing others to define my worth. Our parents, who had been devastated by the revelation of Madison's deception, gradually healed as well. They learned to balance their love for both daughters with the need to protect themselves from future manipulation. Today, Madison and I have a relationship again, but it is different from what we had before. It is built on honesty instead of assumption, on respect instead of obligation. We both know that trust once broken so completely can never be fully restored, but we have found a way to love each other while acknowledging the reality of what happened between us. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that family is not just about blood relationships. It is about how people treat you, how they respect your boundaries, and whether they see you as a person worthy of love and consideration. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest, but you have the right to protect yourself from that hurt, even when it comes from someone you love. I am no longer the woman who would accept being called a burden by anyone, no matter who they are or how much I love them. I learned that standing up for yourself is not selfish or cruel. It is necessary for survival and essential for self-respect. Sometimes the people who love you have to learn the hard way that love without respect is not love at all. And sometimes the greatest act of love you can show someone is refusing to enable their worst behaviors, even when that refusal causes pain for both of you. My room is mine again. My life is mine again. And I have never been more grateful for the strength I found to fight for both. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were treating you poorly? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the courage to protect yourself. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone in their struggles with difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that you are never a burden for existing, for having needs, or for expecting to be treated with basic human dignity. You deserve respect, especially from the people who claim to love you.